Okay, so good afternoon to everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to be here and a great honor to be a speaker at this symposium here in Hong Kong. It's the first time for me to go to Hong Kong. So it was an easy thing to convince me and to clear my schedule to come to you, especially because I'm going to talk about my background. And before I start with the presentation on OBOR as a door opener to markets of Central and Eastern Europe, I just would like to say a few words about the institution I'm coming from. The institution is the Vienna University of Economics and Business, so it's the largest business school in Austria. We are one of the leading business schools in Europe, and we're already established back in 1898 under the Habsburg Empire as an export academy, because Austria and Hungary at this time, they needed business people who venture out, go out and explore markets for us. So it's very similar, let's say the starting idea to what China is now in, namely to go out, go global and explore markets and conquer markets abroad. 11 years ago, we established at this university the Competence Center for Central Eastern Europe at this time. In the meantime, we extended it 2 years ago to emerging markets too. And the idea was just to pool our competences in this area in one institution, not meaning that everybody has to be personally at this institution, but to just offer education courses, training courses, and to do research. So the focus of our activities, and especially my activities, I started back in 1992 with doing a research on Central and Eastern Europe. So you have to imagine there was the Iron Curtain. The Iron Curtain is 50 kilometers away from Vienna to the east, and at this time we were the dead end of the West. So nothing was happening, so this was closed. And then came the great year 1989 for Central and Eastern Europe and for Europe. The Iron Curtain fell, and immediately Vienna found itself in the middle of Europe, and we had a lot of entrepreneurial firms that went to the east and started to do business there. So this was a tabula rasa, so this was an undiscovered field, and Austrian firms were among the first one, and Austria is among the beneficiaries of the opening and the fall of the Iron Curtain because of these activities. So my research was doing business in Central and Eastern Europe, so I followed Western companies, German, French, American companies, Austrian companies into Central and Eastern Europe. So we looked at the strategies, how they entered, what are the marketing strategies. Later on we moved, how do they organize themselves. So you have to know that Vienna is a hub for Central and Eastern Europe, so we have more than 200 regional headquarters of multinational firms located in Vienna, which steer their business out of Vienna. Siemens, for instance, Henkel, for instance, a lot of banks out of Vienna. And later on, I turned to the local companies and I said, okay, it gets a little bit boring just to follow the Western companies, so let's find out what the local companies are doing. And I have one slide in my presentation that shows you one of the findings of this research. Are there very entrepreneurial, innovative companies in Central and Eastern Europe, which are worth to have a closer look at? Okay. What is the structure of my presentation? I would say it has 4 parts. The first is I would like to talk a little bit about the characteristics of Central and Eastern Europe and in relation to the OBOR or B&R and 16&1 initiative. Then I talk a little bit about why do Chinese firms enter the CE market. So the motivation is always a little bit underestimated, but the motivation of a company is the driver of the expansion into a foreign market, and therefore we should look closely at what are these drivers of a company when it goes international. Then of course I have a few slides about how do Chinese companies enter Central and Eastern Europe, and finally I would like to do a little assessment from my side. What are the experiences with 16&1 so far, and what are the lessons for the future? Okay, let's start with the with the Silk Road Initiative, there was already Ms. Ling Yong who did a great job this morning. So I think I can reduce it to the to what is left or was not said yet. So you can maybe from a European perspective, it's quite interesting how we perceive this Belt and Road Initiative. So at the beginning, we thought that's another PR gag or initiative and didn't pay a lot of attention to it. But then over the years, we found out that this is something more serious, and so we started occupying with the OBOR or Belt and Road Initiative. So it's a very impressive, it's a very impressive project. I really congratulate you, and it's impressive because of the size and the vision, and therefore I think we in Europe will have to deal with this in the next years even more. You see what I'm talking about the last mile somehow from a Chinese perspective on the way in these economic corridors to Europe. So Central and Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe is somehow entry points. They are entry points. We saw it before when you come by ship to the port of Piraeus, then you need a rail connection and road connections up to Europe or to Budapest. For instance, when you come via the land corridor, then you have entry points via Russia or Belarus to Poland, to Slovakia, via the Ukraine to Slovakia and Hungary, and therefore these countries are of interest to you. The 16-in-1 initiative was originally founded earlier. It was founded before your President Xi announced the One Belt, One Road initiative in 2013, but it has become an essential part of the Belt and Road Initiative in the meantime. I think it's very clear what this whole thing is about. It's about better connecting the states in Asia, Central Asia and Europe together via economic corridors, and these economic corridors could be via ship routes or routes, land corridors or combinations. The agreement, the 16-in-1 agreement, does not only touch investments and transport, but also financing, so finding instruments to finance this, and also cooperation in science, culture, and education. Here you have the member countries, so we have 11 EU member countries and 5 West Balkan countries. That's an important division because when you want to play in the EU, you have to follow the EU rules. When you're not in the EU, it's a little bit easier for a foreign company regarding the rules. Okay, so what is Central and Eastern Europe? According to this definition, and let's stick to it, it's these 16 countries. And I always like this map, because a map can tell you so much on just one slide. And when you look at this, so what strikes one is the size. So the size of this region is comparable to twice France, the size of France. So the land of France. But at the same size, you have here 16 countries. You have 16 countries. You have 16 languages. 16 languages. You have 16 legal systems, even within the EU. I mean, you have different labor laws. You have different tax systems. And 122 million inhabitants. So that looks good, the 102 million inhabitants. But there's a lot of complexity that you face. You have markets starting with 1.6 million in Estonia, and the range ends then in Poland with 40 million. 1.6, so that's a district here of Hong Kong, probably we are talking about, with its own language, its own setup of rules, and so on. So, and this is exactly the same challenge that Western investors and Western business or Western firms had back in the 90s and early 2000s when they entered this market, because they were faced with all these different country conditions. So the point is, even today, for Western companies, how can I bundle or pool activities for this region to be cost effective? Yeah? Because otherwise it will not work. Yeah? Just the language, the labeling, so you need this in different languages, and not talking about what is allowed to be on the label. So when you sell fruit juices, for instance, so what's the content of fruit, and you are allowed to say it's a fruit juice when the content is more than 15 or 20% of fruit. Yeah? And if you do not have this, yeah, then you're in trouble. Then you have to find a new label for it, a new name for it, and so on. And the question is it worth it when the countries are that small? Okay, here is the recent history of Central and Eastern Europe. So it's very similar in a sense to China. Yeah, I mean, this is the change from a communist system into and a planned economy system into a market economy here, and you had this first 10 years. This was this transformation time, which was very tough for the countries. I mean, GDP went back by 20 to 30%, yeah, from 1989 standards, before it picked up again and then moved up again. In the 2000s, there was the great boom, yeah. So this was really a boom time. From 2002 to 2007, we had an average growth of 6% per year. That was not even bad for Chinese or Asian standards at this time. In this time falls the accession of the EU countries, 2004, 7, and then later Croatia in 13, and all the Western companies poured into this market. So they established the European value chains. You will see later, some say it's a German value chain. Yeah? So when we talk about the German economic miracle, it's based on this too, because the Germans outsourced the labor-intensive work to Central and Eastern Europe with the much lower labor costs. And that's part today of the success of Germany because of this system that they established here in Europe. And so you have to think in value chain terms when you look at automotive industry, electronics industry, and other industries. And then came the year 2008. In this year, the global financial and economic crisis hit Central Eastern Europe. Central Eastern Europe was one of the hardest hit regions of the world. Mrs. Ling Chong showed it. In the Baltics, you had a decline of the GDP by 15% in 1 year, for instance. The other countries had 4 to 6% declines in 1 year of GDP. Yeah? In some industries, metals, for instance, you had minus 50% in demand. Yeah? And that was really dramatic. And it took 4 to 5 years till these economies achieved the same level as in 2008 again. And it was a window of opportunity for all the non-Western, the investors, the non-incumbents, among others, China. And China took this opportunity because it was not just China that moved into the markets, it were Arab countries, it was Turkey, for instance, and we see a lot of new investors and companies entering the scene. And 2014 economic growth comes back. Right now we have a situation, it's like a paradise now in Central Eastern Europe, so we have an average growth rate of close to 4%. The labor costs or the wages went up between 12 and 14%. So there was a threat of a strike by Skoda, one of the biggest car manufacturers in the region. Now they got 12% raise, for instance, and they are running out of labor. So we have a workforce shortage because everything is running so well. And what is similar to China is from low-cost production to innovation. Yeah? So they are trying, how can we get from an efficiency-oriented economy to an innovation-oriented without getting stuck in the middle? Okay, what are the motives The motives are clear. There's a market motive. The second one is the springboard to core Europe, so using CEE as a springboard. Then political reasons of the 16.1 and the 5-year plan, where the government says, please go there. I'm not just sure if it's a motivation or a trigger, but it's necessary to mention it here. And the strategic asset seeking, the looking for technology and brands, is not so relevant for Central and Eastern Europe as it is relevant for core Europe. Okay, let's get to the first one, the market view. Again, I don't want to repeat myself. You see a few large markets from a European perspective. Yeah? Poland with 40 million, Romania with 20 million, and then you have Czech Republic, Hungary with 10 million. And then it gets smaller and smaller. Yeah? So that's the challenge, of course, regarding the living standards. When you look at the GDP per head, for instance, then you have here as a benchmark Germany. Why do I say benchmark? Because it's very much called a catching up process. Yeah? So you're saying, how can we catch up to EU average income levels, for instance, when you are a CEE economy, and you see, for instance, the EU CEE has an average GDP of 26,000. Yeah, so that's somewhere 55% to Germany. And when you go to the West Balkans, which are not members of the EU, yeah, like Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, or Albania, you get down to 12,000 euro. I also put China in here somewhere. Yeah. And you see there's a lot of room for growth, and that's of course something that's interesting for China when you want to participate in growing markets. Okay, the second one, the second motive I called CEE as a springboard to Europe. So what does this mean? It means that Chinese companies invest in Central and Eastern Europe to be closer to the customers. You have here a slide with Hungary and the famous Chinese companies which are present, for instance, in Hungary, in addition to the many thousand small companies that are there too. The idea is also entering these European value chains and networks. Yeah? How can I get, for instance, into this network by buying a supplier, for instance, and so getting an access to this European market, and of course making use of low-cost production and a very skilled workforce. What I would like to highlight in addition is that China is a stronghold of manufacturing in the EU. You see that here the share of manufacturing industry as percentage of GDP is nearly as high as in China. Yeah? So we really have here industrial powerhouses like the Czech Republic, and the Czech Republic has 27% of the GDP comes from manufacturing. Hungary following, and they are all have a higher share than Germany, for instance, and you see at the end France and UK with somewhere between 10 and 12%, where you have a deindustrialization. And the deindustrialization is happening because production moves from those countries to Central and Eastern Europe. You see here the change. Yeah, the change is manufacturing as growth driver. From 2010 on, for instance, the industrial production in little Slovakia was expanded by 50%. Right now, they have an investment by Jaguar, which brings them another 1,500 jobs plus 15,000 jobs with the suppliers. Maybe not that much from a Chinese perspective, but for little Slovakia, which is called the Detroit of the East, because they produce 300 cars per 1,000 inhabitants in Slovakia, and this is Volkswagen, Kia, and I think Peugeot. And you see all these countries are gaining in industrial production, while Italy and the other one is Greece are losing. Yeah? Here you have the very strong argument why to go to Central and Eastern Europe. It's low labor costs. Yeah? It's a comparative advantage. So you see here the hourly labor costs in different countries. And at the bottom end is Bulgaria with €4.40. I mean, this is even lower than the costs here in China. Yeah? And you see this huge labor cost differential. That's of course attracting investors. Here you see, this is just a glimpse on what's going on there. This is the 10 largest manufacturers in Central Eastern Europe in 2015. Yeah? And when you look at this, number one is Škoda Auto. It's part of Volkswagen Group. Yeah? Then follows Audi Hungary work. 4 weeks ago I was in Győr. There is the Audi engine factory. And they told me that they are the biggest engine factory of the world. They are producing 2 million engines per year. Yeah? Then you have Volkswagen Slovakia. Yeah? Then comes General Electric. Then comes Agrovert. That's an agricultural and chemical business conglomerate, a local one, by the way, owned by the Prime Minister of Czech Republic, Mr. Babis, who's the owner of this business group. So you don't know if he became politician because of it or the other way around. Then Medinvest, this is by an Ukrainian oligarch, so Ukraine is part of it. And then you have Kia, Hyundai, Automobile Dacia, so that's the Romanian company of Renault, and Mercedes-Benz manufacturing in Hungary, which by the way are doubling now their production site in Kecskemét in Hungary. So among the top 10, you have 8 foreign companies. Out of these 8 foreign companies, I didn't count it now, but probably 6 come from the automotive industry. Yeah? Here you see how strong these clusters are. There's an electronics cluster, for instance, in Slovakia. So electronics industry comes as a strong second. In Slovakia, the automotive industry is 40% of industrial production. Just automotive, yeah. Electronics is 10%, for instance. And you find all the big players also there. Foxconn is, for instance, there, and many others. You have, Samsung, Panasonic, and Whirlpool. Yeah. Then, for instance, Poland is one of the European leaders in domestic appliance manufacturing. Yeah? And again, the idea is this is not just manufacturing for Poland, it's an export platform. So it's a manufacturing and export platform for Western Europe, core Europe, and Central and Eastern Europe, and sometimes even beyond Europe. So we have very strong export platforms in those countries. So you see 80% is exports, the rest is, and this is a very mixed portfolio of products, stays in Poland, but Poland is the largest economy there. And the other industry that is quite interesting, which is not so visible, is shared service centers and business process outsourcing. So we have more than 1,400 shared service centers, nearly 500,000 employees. And the compound average growth rate since 2008 is 17%. So this is a success story. So there you find all the graduates of the universities and colleges. They have to speak 2 foreign languages to work there. For instance, in Bratislava, as I said, 50 kilometers from the Austrian border, you have IBM International Services with 3,500. You have Lenovo, you have Dell, you have HP, and so on. Here now comes another reason for why to go there. Is this local hero. So this is my research that I did on successful entrepreneurial firms in Central and Eastern Europe, just to make it short, because most of those companies you probably have never heard before. What we did is we looked at the strategy, which strategy is more profitable for those companies? Is it a hybrid strategy, differentiation combined with low cost? Because a pure low cost strategy doesn't exist anymore. So there's always an element of branding or something design combined with it, and then a focus or a niche strategy. And what you can see clearly here is that the focus and niche strategy is going very well. So you have a 16% return on sales, that we used as a target here, or as a performance criterion, and you see that IT is very strong. It's even 19% in IT. The whole IT industry has a 19% return on sales, and especially when they go into the focus and niche sector. And here you find gaming companies. You find companies especially strong in security, in the security sector, like antivirus products, and so on. And for instance, what I found out, this is Voltopia. This is a company in Bulgaria located in the capital Sofia that is producing artificial climbing walls, and is the market leader, the global market leader in artificial climbing walls. I will visit it next week because I go with students to Sofia, and so I announced that I'll come, and they are hosting me. And I found out that for their growth they needed money, of course capital, and the China CE fund, out of the 16&1 initiative, is investing money in this company. Okay, and this here connects with 16&1 and the priority sectors, but given that I'm running out of time and Thomas is looking at me, I think this is self-explaining. What is interesting is that it's quite different what they are looking for, or what are the let's say, the areas where China focuses, and that makes a lot of sense because the industries are also different. But for the whole region, it is important to create these infrastructure links, and that's a top priority of China for finishing this economic corridor. How do Chinese firms enter markets? I will be short on these: exports, foreign direct investments, or projects. Strong import growth in large CE markets, and this is trading. And there are thousands of Chinese companies there, which do this trade, which are unknown, but which are present on this market. I just have this figure: 6,000 Chinese companies in Romania alone. I didn't get the figure for the others. And when you look at this ranking, then you see that China is the number 2 importer to Poland, number 3 the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Serbia. So you have a very strong position in those countries already on the import side, and these countries or the imports are growing, at least in the big ones. So you see in Poland and Czech Republic. Where does the FDI go? Okay, here you have the overview of Europe, and it's the combined, the cumulative investment from 2000 to 2014 in euro million. You see most went into UK and then Germany and France, but it's not so bad from a CE perspective, Romania and Hungary, but of course at lower levels. The industries, I skipped this, so you have energy and automotive and agriculture. And here, summing up, where does the investment go into Central Eastern Europe? It's 8% out of this whole volume: manufacturing, agriculture, and infrastructure. Here you have some top. This is core Europe. This is not Central and Eastern Europe. Why do Chinese companies go to core Europe, to Germany? It's because asset seeking. So they want to get access to the technology, to the know-how, to the brands, and to the distribution channels. So we have industrials, high tech, and finance and energy, and you have Mercedes-Benz. So we just heard 3 weeks ago that the owner of Geely bought more than 9% of Mercedes. Volvo is already part of it. KUKA is one of the hotly debated cases. Midea has bought the robotics company KUKA, and the Germans are now somehow sorry that this company has gone. And Syngenta is the biggest deal, but this is a Swiss company in seed products. Medion is in the electronics company. which was a supplier for retailers, and Deutsche Bank by HNA is another example. Yeah? Here we have the investments in CEE. It's more mixed, so it's even for me difficult to find out what's the common denominator, and it's more market seeking. You have seen before the growth. It goes more from greenfield to acquisitions. Yeah? Although this is a problem in Central and Eastern Europe because they are interested in greenfields because they create jobs, while the acquisition is not creating jobs. Yeah? Chinese banks are very interesting. They are getting stronger now. And I think the role is also to accompany the bigger Chinese firms into the market. What is a good role for a bank? So just explaining what are the rules when you want to invest in a market, and then coming up also with financing solutions. Yeah? We have a lot of indirect presence via acquisition of German parent companies. So there are some automotive suppliers which found themselves in Central Eastern Europe because the German company had subsidiaries there, and now they are in Central and Eastern Europe. Yeah? Now they have to make sense out of it. Yeah? Developed CE countries for the developed CE countries like Poland and Hungary, for the Czech Republic, they are not interested that you create jobs there in the low-cost area. They are interested in partnerships. So there's a very different shift. Yeah? They want to have competent partners for them. And the infrastructure projects are connectivity. Here you have the investments in the infrastructure investments. So that's a totally different business with a lot of state support. But the dangerous thing is that China is taking projects which Western investors don't touch because they are too risky. So it's up to the Chinese entrepreneurs to find out if it's worth to take the company or not. I mean, but that's typical entrepreneurial. I wouldn't personally invest now in coal-fired thermal plants, for instance, because when you know what's going on with climate, with global warming and so on, and all the legislation, so that's tricky. Yeah. So what are the experiences? I'm coming to an end, Thomas. Yeah? What are the experiences so far? I think many goals have been achieved. Yeah, I mean, China is for sure visible now. Yeah, so China is present in Europe as an investor and a project partner. There's an intensified relationship now between the countries in Central Eastern Europe with China. But when I do an assessment, we also have to come to this points. The trade volume is quite below the intended 100 billion. So right now, the latest figure was about 50 billion. It's quite interesting that this multilateral 16-to-1 framework has turned into a bilateral concept between China and each country. Yeah. And the reason is also that there's a competition between the CE countries for China investments, so they don't want to do it in a larger forum. Let's put it this way. Yeah. Some CE leaders use the 16-and-1 to demonstrate their independence from EU. So maybe you have heard we have a few EU rebels. Yeah. Which want to change the course of EU, yeah, like Mr. Orban in Hungary or Mr. Kaczynski in Poland, yeah, and so you have to be careful if you're partnering with the right governments, because in the EU core they are noticing this, and I'm not sure if China wants to be played off by the partners. And there's an obvious clash of ways of doing business, especially in the infrastructure projects. China comes, finances it, brings its own people, brings its own companies, and says, okay, let's do it. That doesn't work in Europe. I mean, this is especially in EU Europe, and I understand that there are overcapacities in China, and that's a way to get rid of them, partly. Yeah, but the concept that you can have a public project without any competition, without any public tender, yeah, that's a no-go in Europe, and therefore I think Chinese businesses have to learn to adapt here in this context. The European concerns. Yeah, I said there's a clash of ways of doing business. I think one thing is the involvement of the state into business, which is obviously quite strong in China, and this is not, let's say, welcomed in Europe. There are often the questions about hidden agenda. So we have takeovers of European companies where we find out later that there's a provincial or regional government, the whole owner of this acquirer. So you have to understand that it's quite sensitive when in Europe governments are directly involved in the companies, yeah, and it's about respecting EU rules, especially with public tenders and social and labor laws, what affects especially the infrastructure projects. And on the other hand, you have to see is there a value added for Central and Eastern Europe too when you bring your own funding firms and workers. So there's what is left for the CE country. I mean, it can pay the bills, yeah. And finally, it has a railway, it has a power plant, or it has a road. Yeah, that's fine. But is there more to it? And then, of course, again on a political level, the question is if these close partnerships with CE countries helps China to block certain EU decisions, because you need just to have one country that is vetoing a decision. So and that happens then on a political level. Okay, so what are my last slide? Yeah, what are my suggestions for moving forward? I think learning is most important. So we have to understand that Chinese companies are long-term thinking compared to short to mid-term thinking. I mean, not as short as US companies or US Americans. So therefore I say short to mid-term thinking in Europe. It's about trust. Business relations only work when they are based on trust, and there have to be common interests, and there have to be transparent procedures so to understand what's going on. China has to adapt entry strategies, financing models, for instance, and compliance with EU rules. The financing models, just one word, I mean, China is thinking that it is offering cheap financing, but it's not the case. So for the 16&1, so they had a loan agreement for 10 billion. Yeah, you have to see that Poland alone is getting out of EU structural funds 100 billion. Poland alone is getting 100 billion. Yeah, so the question is, how effective is a 10 billion loan? I mean, of course, they are all welcoming this, yeah, but just to put it in perspective, and therefore the idea is to go more into specific projects like the one that I showed you with the investment in Voltopia, helping companies develop and prepare for internationalization, and of course cooperation. So what could be a focus on cross-country projects, not on one country, but clustering, cooperating with a number of countries, especially when it's about transportation links, together with CE and EU. And then I think that would be something where every party is contributing the best to a joint project, and that helps the idea and goals of the 16&1, namely to have more economic cooperation for the better life and living of the people in these countries. Thank you very much.